Well, thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm Amy Henning with EO Raleigh-Durham. Welcome to our 13th virtual learning event out of our series we're calling Coronavirus in Your Business. We have an awesome session for you today. Matt Zeman, our learning chair, has put together most of these. Melissa has helped a ton to pull this together, and she's going to give our introductions. And Olivia at EO Global has helped us so much in getting the word out to other chapters. So it's amazing to see folks join these calls from the far reaches of the world. And what started out as a way to connect with our local chapter in light of essentially canceling all in-person events for the immediate future has turned out to have a lot more interest. We would like for these to be as interactive as possible and plan to open up the conversation to questions and interactions in classic EO style from our own places of experience. More on that in a moment. I'm going to put Matt and our chapter president's Todd email in the chat. If you have questions or suggestions, please send them to them. And before we get going, I will go ahead and also put an invitation to our next virtual event. This one's just for our chapter. We just have a few spaces left, and I am placing lunch orders for that. So if you're a local Raleigh-Durham person, you can go ahead and register for that. It'll be in the chat. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Melissa.
Yay. All right. Hey guys, as most of you business owners know, we're all wanting to know how to open or reopen safely. And what does that look like, from testing protocols, employer liabilities, and if we should be testing our employees for COVID-19. So to help with this, I'd love to introduce Mike Radeas in the bottom right. Say hi, Mike. Mike is the VP of Sales for Radeas Labs. Brian Riston is the director of COVID testing. So they're both here today to walk us through a lot of items that would be in regards to COVID testing in the workplace. And just quickly, Radeas is a privately owned, highly complex clinical lab based out of Wake Forest, but they serve 38 different states around our country. So they are a well-versed lab. They've been on the forefront of research and development of clinical testing for COVID-19. So we're really excited to have their expertise here, but we also want to know a lot about liability. And so we thought we would bring in our very own Ann Close with Close HR. Ann is the president of Close HR and is an SAP for the last couple of years. They are a fractional on-site, let's see if I get this right, and people management HR consulting firm. And she is here to share her expertise and what it looks like from a liability standpoint today. So one quick note is, as we're talking, there may be questions. We're gonna have about 15 minutes at the end for question and answers. And so if you have any questions, go ahead as you think of them and type them in the chat. That way we don't forget and we can address all of the questions at the end. So awesome. Mike, I'll have you guys start us off.
Yeah, thank you guys. Again, my name's Mike Radeas with Radeas Clinical Labs. Just appreciate being able to jump on with you guys and share a little bit about our journey over the past few months as we've been working with so many different sectors, from healthcare, municipalities, employers, and even athletics, as to what it looks like to get back to work. And so with that, we wanted to talk through a little bit about what we've experienced, what we've learned, and really 5 questions that you should be asking as you look at getting back to work. And we're going to move through this pretty quick. Just to respect time, I know you've been on a lot of Zoom meetings, but we want to be able to spend some time at the end as well to answer a lot of questions. And not to get too simple, but I figured the best way for us to start off is to really talk about what COVID is. So let's look at these 5 questions and then we'll kind of jump in. So if you go to the next slide. So these are kind of the 5 questions to think through as to how and when to open up. So the first question is going to be, what is COVID-19? Second, what is my liability as an employer for opening and also considering testing for COVID? What is the science and the stats around testing for COVID, things like that? A lot of people are asking, what are protocols that I shouldn't put in place? What is legal? What's appropriate? And then exactly what would a testing program look like? So we're gonna walk through these one by one and hopefully give you a lot of tools to think through with your teams as you look to reopen. So as far as the first question for what COVID-19 is, if we jump to the next slide, I've heard so many answers to that question. Is it a government conspiracy? Was COVID-19 created by Bill Gates to end the global food shortage? Is this something that our foreign enemies have created to attack us? My goodness, we could probably spend this whole webinar talking through what ifs, but at the end of the day, what it is it's a novel virus. This is something that is a new virus that has created a global pandemic. It's real, and it's changing the way we work and the way we interact with one another. But the question to be asked is, are viruses new? And the answer to that is simply no. I mean, we've had viruses in our workplaces ever since you started your business, ever since you started your company. We've been interacting with different viruses, and they've been around for thousands of years. And so there are some new things that have come about from the novel coronavirus, but we shouldn't be so afraid to run from it, but to really ask good questions about what is different about this. And the second point here is, as we look at what coronavirus is, something new is that it's something that we can see. And so you ask that's an interesting thing to say. It's something new that employers can see. So in the clinical lab space, we've been looking at viruses for a very long time. That's what we do. It's part of our job, whether it's under a microscope, whether it's using a high throughput machine. But that's something that you as an employer haven't been allowed to see. There's questions you're not allowed to ask. And it's actually a good thing. We talk about HIPAA, we talk about private healthcare information. These are things that employers aren't required to push in. Let's think about this. What if you as an employer decided, I'm going to create an AIDS-free environment? You know, tomorrow we're going to set up and we're going to screen every employee for HIV and to create an AIDS-free environment. You go home thinking, I'm going to be a hero to keep everyone safe. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. How would that end? That would end maybe in a lawsuit. You get a lot of free TV publicity. You know, you're not allowed to ask these questions, and it would be a terrible thing for your business because that is protected health information. Historically, the only relationship between labs and clinical testing with employers was drug testing. You know, this is something that is helpful and something that you've been allowed to look at to make sure that your delivery driver, when they're carrying the most important, valuable shipment to your largest client, isn't under the influence of any drugs. And so regular employee drug testing and screening is something that's been commonplace. And so, you know, what has changed with the novel coronavirus is this is something that employers are actually allowed to see, that we're being encouraged to think through ways to track and to look at this. And so no longer is drug testing the only clinical test that's moved into the workplace. It has a new sibling, and that sibling is COVID testing that we're seeing expanding through municipalities, athletic programs, and businesses alike. And really the third thing that coronavirus is it is something that OSHA is requiring workplaces to track. They're wanting you to press in to find out if somebody positive. How do we communicate that? And you know, what is your liability once you know that information? So I hope that's a little brief overview about, you know, what are some of the new things that have come about of what COVID-19 is. And so that leads into our second question, which I'm going to turn over to Ann, is really, what's our liability?
Thank you, Mike. As an employer, we'll just start with, you can't ever eliminate all your employer risk, but you can take great strides to minimize your risks. And part of that is, you know, you need to be conscious of just what Mike said. The EEOC gave employers permission to ask COVID-related health questions. You know, do you have symptoms of, you know, shortness of breath? Do you have a fever? You know, the things that have been identified and communicated out from the CDC, you can ask those types of questions. You cannot pull in, well, how does that relate to your asthma? How does that relate to your high blood pressure? Because it just, again, what Mike said, that crosses the line over into HIPAA. And that's, you know, that's information that we're not supposed to be talking about as employers, and we're not supposed to be using as we make decisions. So you have to be careful that you don't cross those kinds of lines. And then you don't want to ask people, well, I know you're over 65. How do you feel about coming back to the workplace? Again, you're crossing that line. You need to give the employees an opportunity to ask you. So when we communicate what our plan is, we make sure that we give space to the employees to respond and provide feedback on a personal basis, whether they have concerns or issues. And at that point, then you as an employer would look at those as reasonable accommodations. You know, they have asthma, they're over 65. Do they really have to be in the workplace? We can still keep them working from home. That's the best thing to protect them, but you also want to protect your employees in the office space. So, you know, you have to be flexible with your plans. You might have to do some, you know, reasonable accommodations for those that have legitimate concerns and health issues that, again, we don't want to necessarily get into, but when they make us aware of them, then we try to, you know, help them and accommodate them and take care of them. And you also have to be aware of, you know, OSHA says you as an employer have to provide a safe work environment. Okay, but they don't really define that. And of course, no one saw this coming, you know, 10 years ago and put this into, you know, a step-by-step, here's what you do when COVID hit. We're working, you know, on a day-to-day basis with new information, but you as an employer need to provide that safe work environment. So to minimize your risk of someone saying, you know, hey, this is a unsafe work environment, you need to take, you know, a look at your facilities and figure out where the gaps are and how do you best, you know, handle, you know, the physical distancing and, you know, wearing facial coverings and those kinds of things. So you need to be very intentional and find out as much information as you can and make the best decision to not only protect the employees, but also to protect the other team members and the company. And try to take as many strides as you can to minimize those risks and then move forward.
And can we talk about a few specifics? For instance,
Sure.
Are there certain health questions we're allowed to ask or that we're not allowed to ask our employees during this time?
Yes, a lot of companies are working with what they call a wellness checklist. We have been given permission, again, from the EEOC to take temperatures. So you can take temperatures when people come into the workspace. You can ask those questions, you know, have you been around anybody that has tested positive? Do you have any of these symptoms? And again, you know, shortness of breath and fever, and, you know, the other 3 or 4 symptoms that, you know, people might have. Then you can, if they say yes, then you can ask them to go home, call a healthcare provider, and take the next steps that they are recommended to take. If they have any concerns or if you have concerns, it's better to be safe than sorry. So if somebody has a temperature of over 100.4, which is the guideline that's out right now, then it's in your best interest and in their best interest that they go home and not come back to the workplace until they are fever-free, and also that they've contacted a healthcare provider.
Are there any specific questions you would steer business owners to stay away from or topics when asking employees questions?
Yes, it's best to have a checklist and let them fill it out so you're not actually asking questions. Because unfortunately, when you start engaging in a conversation, it's a natural tendency to ask, well, I know that you were thinking about, getting pregnant, are you pregnant yet? Those kinds of things just slip out, and you as a business owner do not want that to happen. You also, again, you don't want to say, well, I know you had a heart attack 2 years ago. Are you concerned, or is this an issue for you? You're crossing the lines over to the questions that we're not allowed to ask because they're covered by HIPAA and ADA. We need to stay within the strict guidelines of here's what the CDC says that are strictly related to COVID, and that's what we have to stick with. And the recommendations that have been shared with all the information I've gathered, it's better to have a checklist and let the people fill it out themselves and not try to engage in too many conversations. Unless you've asked them, do you have concerns, please let us know. So when they come to you and initiate that conversation, then you can discuss those things, but you don't want to be the one initiating that conversation as an employer.
So how would you suggest or guide us, and if an employee is uncomfortable with coming back, but we need them back, how would you navigate that or advise us to navigate that?
Again, you have to be willing to be flexible and listen to them, listen to their concerns. And I would repeat those back to to make sure you have a good understanding of, what their concerns and then what their issues might be. And then look at, is there any way possible that we can provide a safe work environment for them? If there isn't, then I would look at, well, what can we do from a work at home situation? How long, can we continue that to the way they feel comfortable, but they're also productive? But you don't want to ever force anybody into the workplace that has a concern, because again, you could open up yourself to potential liability and a lawsuit providing, a workplace that's not safe for them in their situation. So again, a little bit of grace, a little bit of flexibility, and then just readdress it on an ongoing basis, because over time, as you get more protocols and things in place, they might feel more comfortable. And at the same time, their condition might have changed. And now that they're in a better position, they would feel more comfortable coming in.
Great. And speaking of safety, last question for now. Are we supposed to provide PPE? Are they supposed to provide it? What's your guidance there?
There's nothing set in stone, but as an employer, it's in your best interest to try to provide, again, as part of a safe work environment, those kinds of things, whether it's facial coverings, whether it's putting the signs in the hallway, either for one-way traffic or the markers for the 6-foot physical distancing, communicating the cleaning policies, the sanitation policies, trying to provide as much information and as much, disinfectant wipes, facial coverings, gloves that you feel like would best protect your team, because we want to protect the team as much as we can. So that's, depending on them, people may or may not have access, they may or may not want to, but then, again, if you're asymptomatic, you don't have any symptoms and you feel like you shouldn't have to do that,
Sure.
but you have to think of the other person that you might potentially infect. So having a policy and then holding people accountable to that is important in moving forward for a safe work environment.
Thank you. Mike and Brian, is COVID-19 a workplace test? Is it something that we can do in the office, or do the employees have to go to a doctor?
That's a good question. There's a lot of talk about that, and there's a lot of different things that I'm sure you guys have heard of, these rapid tests, right? And you hear on one side of the aisle that they're fantastic and they can be done at the point of care, not in the home yet. So that's something that's not been approved. The other side is you hear that none of these work and they're all coming from China and they're all bad. So here at Radeas, we've actually validated, we've purchased, we're upwards of 20 different rapid test kits between the IgG and IgM antibody test kits. And to be honest, we have found 2 that work. So when we validate these in-house, we run a lot of different studies that show the efficacy of do they work or not. And that's from dilution studies to interference studies, and just showing, can these pick up COVID-19 or not. So it is a workplace test. There's been some verbiage that has come out that the employer is able, like Ann was talking about, not only to ask the questions, but also to have employees tested. And we're getting from OSHA, right? We're getting told, hey, we need to track this as well. So yes, it is a workplace test. Now, how that's performed, there's a couple different options. What Radeas has done is create a different platform so we can do it at your business. Or if we need to set up a different location, there's just lots of ways to do that. So yes, and we'll get further into that later in the presentation, but it is a workplace test that can be done there. And there's some new technology coming out that's going to make this actually dramatically easier at the workplace. So we'll get into more of that, but yes, it is something that the employer can do at the office.
Great. That's awesome. I will let you guys continue. I'm done with my questions.
No worries. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of dive into the science and stats behind what we're doing, right? Because when we first started this, everybody we knew had the coronavirus. That's what they thought. They said, I had it, I for sure had it. And we started doing testing and and we quickly realized that out of all the testing we're seeing, and even a lot of across the country, we're really only seeing about 2 to 5% of tests actually be positive. So you're seeing stuff on the media, and I'm not going to go down that path on this call, but it's leading us to believe that these percentages are much higher, and it's just not what we're seeing. So are the numbers getting bigger? Absolutely, right? Are the number of tests being done bigger? Yes. So we're going to see some of that naturally. But what we're seeing is really 2 to 5%. And if we even break it down further than that, it really gets lesser percentage-wise when we start talking about specific businesses, and we take away places like nursing homes. We take away places where the proximity and everyday life is very close. So 2 to 5% is it's not where we want to be. And I'm not over here saying it's everything is okay, but the fact is that's a pretty good number, right? That's something that as an employer you should feel very good about, of knowing, okay, those are numbers that we can work with. The more concerning aspect of that number, you'll see in the middle of this slide, is the asymptomatic patients. Symptomatic patients are kind of easy to deal with. You have a fever, you have a cough, you have other symptoms that are in line with COVID-19, and you can start the quarantine process, get tested, and go on. The crazier thing is we're seeing of that 2 to 5%, upwards of 30+% of those are asymptomatic patients. So that's where it gets tricky. And especially as an employer, how do we protect ourselves and our employees with asymptomatic patients, right? It doesn't matter what type of protocols you put in place for social distancing. I mean, there's no way to completely eliminate that in every business, right? So how do we do that, right? And that's why we'll get into later in the presentation of testing is really how we can identify and we can really have good surveillance of these asymptomatic patients. And the downside is, I'm just gonna burst the bubble now to everybody, is unfortunately there's no test out there that just gives us an answer that we can just stand on and move on. Every test out there has detection windows, meaning even PCR, so real-time PCR confirmations, which is the most solid test out there in the sense of giving you yes or no, is that genetic material in the patient or not? There is a chance for a 48-hour window of time that the patient could have the virus, but test negative on a test. And that's the tough part, right? Is there's just not a perfect solution. And we talk about antibody testing. Well, that window could be anywhere from 2 to 7 days where your body has the virus, but is not producing enough antibodies to show it on a test. So that's where it gets into, we have to surveil, and the surveillance of the employee or the patient or whatever setting you're in is crucial, because it's something that we can take a test on Monday, but if you go to the grocery store Tuesday, it all starts over. So from an employer standpoint, the ability to really hone in and provide that security for your employee comes in the form of ongoing testing, especially right now, is until we have a lot more information. So just a quick recap on that. You're seeing a 2 to 5% positive rate when we're talking PCR and antibody testing coming in. Antibodies is going to be a little bit higher, and that's just because some of the antibody testing is capturing all of coronaviruses, not just COVID-19. And that's why we reflex that out to a PCR confirmation to show, okay, patient has antibodies, but is there a virus right now? And then the asymptomatics are really what we're trying to identify for you as employers, is making sure that you don't have a couple employees that are asymptomatic in your workplace, like Ann was talking about, not taking any of those protocols seriously because they don't have symptoms. And then just understanding the detection windows and why we deploy testing in the way we do because of that. So if you can, Amy, jump to that next slide. Mike and I will tag team this one if you want to start off.
Yeah, so as far as screening protocols go, I really appreciate, Ann, what you talked about. One of the key things is introducing a questionnaire tool that really helps get the conversation going. And as you say, and it's a delicate balance we have to take with not asking the wrong questions, but really asking the right questions to develop a screening protocol there. Even watching yesterday on the television, Amazon's already showing their protocols of doing tip checks on a lot of their drivers and package carriers. So depending on your facility, what the proximity is like for your employees, helping to understand what type of protocols are going to be helpful for you when it comes to questionnaires, when it comes to whether or not temperature checks are valid, how you arrange your desk, and then, you know, what type of routine testing also could be beneficial for you is really determined by the style of your workplace, as well as how much interaction they would have with each other. What we're really looking to do is to mitigate risk here. As Brian talked about, there is limitations with the testing. It is very valuable as we look at surveilling and tracking. For us, you know, we've worked with a few different police departments locally, and the biggest thing for these police departments is the questions that come to us are what happens if I lose my whole police force? You know, what happens to the city at that point? What happens if I get this information and I have to shut everything down? And the biggest thing for us is, you know, going back to that 2 to 5% number of positives. First, I can't tell you that's not going to happen, but I can tell you that's probably not going to happen. Those aren't the data points that we're seeing. What it is helping us to do is when we identify these officers who were exposed and who were positive, we were able to mitigate that risk. We're able to kind of shut them down, quarantine them out, and really create a level of confidence where you know, the other officers felt safe, they were calm, they understood that those were exposed, had been quarantined, as well as they could go back to work. And when we're thinking about a safe work environment, the thing that I talk to different business owners, even our sports teams, is the last thing we want to do is bring people back to work, just bring their bodies back to work. Because what we can do is we can bring their bodies back to work, but their minds are still at home, or their minds aren't engaged. And what testing allows us to do is to give them a confidence so that they can return both in mind and body back to work. That they don't see their coworker as the enemy, and we kind of take away this boogeyman aspect of the coronavirus, that it's hiding around the corner and it's going to jump out and get them, but to really give them a peace, because we're trying to create a COVID-free environment, or as close as we can to that, by identifying what are healthy protocols for our business, what does it look like to mitigate risk, and to really create a safe work environment, especially if you have a business where you're bringing in clients or you're bringing in customers, or maybe with your business, maybe you're going into accounts. And so creating that safe environment where you can say, hey, this is something we're doing to protect our business as well as protect your business as a client, so that you can continue to get back to work. And we can see this word, profit, back in our businesses, which may have been missing for the past few months.
Yeah. And to piggyback off what Mike is saying, I think when we talk about safe work environment, you know, we talk about PPE, we talk about all these protocols that are coming down in place, but, you know, most of you rely heavily on your employees' performance. And when your employees do an exceptional job, that's when you see your business thrive. And so the safe work environment, you know, is just as much as important as protocols and social distancing and PPE is like Mike was talking about, getting your employees back there feeling safe. That's our job as leaders, right? As they come back to our workplace and they know that they're taken care of and they can perform at a high level because they're not looking over their shoulder, like he's talking about, of the boogeyman of is this going to get me? And it's not that you're taking all of that away, but what you're doing is giving them peace of mind that we're doing everything we can. And I think as humans, when we understand that we're being taken care of and that our employer cares and our employer is taking measures that not only, like I said, from a PPE standpoint, but from a personal standpoint of saying, how can I protect you? That goes much greater because of your testing them doesn't just affect them in the workplace. It affects them when they go home. It affects them when they go out to the grocery store, that they can shop to get food for their family and come back home and know that, hey, I'm being tested on a reoccurring basis, that I feel safe. So it's just something that gives us so much more than just this safe work environment, that it creates an atmosphere where your employees can go back to operating at a high level. So we can go to the next slide. We'll jump into, what do our testing programs look like? And this is a little vague on purpose because every one of your businesses is completely different. So something we learned early on is part of what we do, right? And I'm sure a lot of you on this webinar are like, hey, how can we systematize something and go and make it run and churn? So we created these protocols, and then we quickly realized every office, every clinical office, every employee office, everywhere is so different. And where people are coming and going, how the office is set up. I mean, it's just dramatically different in every way. So we quickly realized, wait a second, we need to have a multifaceted approach that we can deploy in any setting. So I'm going to jump into kind of what we test and how we test, and I'm not going to go too far into it. And I would love to get into more of this conversation individually after this call. But we're testing in two different ways. From a PCR side, that's why you hear the term real-time PCR confirmation. That is testing if that genetic material is that virus in your body right now or not. And then the other side of that is antibody testing. So anytime your body gets a virus, your body starts to fight it off and it produces antibodies, which is a good thing. It's something your body has naturally done. It's actually what we're created to do. And we're measuring that is a antibody in your system for coronavirus, present or not. So from a PCR side, I'm sure you guys have heard about the nasal swabs where they're going to stick this Q-tip that's like 48 inches long into your nose and touch the back of your head with it. It is not comfortable, but it is very accurate, right? When we know scientifically that that's where the virus lies. So that is something that is there. Now, there's some new technology that has come out that has been validated and we should have access to in 2 weeks, which is a spit test, which sounds kind of gross. But when we start talking about an employer, that's fantastic because we no longer have to have a phlebotomist on site to do a blood draw or someone that is qualified to do the nasal swab, to where they simply spit into a cup, put the lid on it, shake it up, and ship it off. So both of those are going to be on the PCR side. On the antibody side, we have multiple different options, ranging from a high throughput machine that will do the test here into also a rapid test that you guys have seen where we can get results in about 15 minutes. So there are some limitations to both of these tests. The antibody test is a blood test. So the rapid test is a simple finger prick, and you're going to place it on the test. And once again, within 15 minutes, you get results. The other antibody test, which is going to be a little more sensitive and a little more specific, and when it comes to results, is a blood draw. So someone would simply draw blood, send it in, whole blood, and we could run the test here at the lab. Now, the reason we offer both, because some people always ask, well, if the real-time PCR gives you confirmation, why would you do anything else? And it's kind of like what we talked about before. PCR gives us a understanding right then in that moment. So Monday at 3:55, when you swabbed that employee or patient, the virus was present or not. But if the employee then goes to the grocery store after work and comes back to work the next day, it all starts over. So the antibody testing is really where we start talking about surveillance. How do we look at a snapshot of time? If PCR is just a single snapshot, how do we look at a range of time? And that's where the antibodies give us, right? So when an employer wants to test his employees, a lot of times we're doing a PCR confirmation and an antibody test together. So we have a baseline for that employee. Because if we see a positive response on an antibody test, we understand that they've been exposed at some level to a coronavirus. Now, hopefully here in the next few weeks, that specificity gets a lot tighter. And what I mean by that is right now, a lot of these antibody tests are for all coronaviruses. So you have common colds in there, you have SARS, you have MERS, you have a lot of different coronaviruses that it can detect. Where with COVID-19, we want it to be specific to COVID-19. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks or so, the talk is we're going to have access to that to where it is 99.9999, that it is COVID-19 and very specific. So we'll keep you up to speed on that. But the antibodies allow us to see a window of time. Have you been exposed to this? And the reason we want to know that is if there's antibodies in your system, that's a good thing. We don't know, science hasn't shown us, the data is not out, is do you have full immunity or do you not have full immunity? Because in some viruses, you get it, your body produces an antibody, both IgM and IgG, and that IgG is that long-term antibody that stays in your system. And in some viruses, it makes you immune to it. So you can never get it again. Every time you get it, your body will it'll fight off, it won't survive. In other cases, you can have partial immunity. So we don't really know what that is right now. because the data is just not there yet. But the fact that we can show there are antibodies in your system is a good thing. That means your body is naturally fighting it off. So those are the two styles of testing we're going to be doing. And we've been doing for a while, and a lot has changed. And you're going to hear the words EUA, you're going to hear the words FDA approved or not approved, and understand that everything we do here at Radeas and that we will be doing out in the field is already approved. And we operate not just by the FDA, but there's an entity called CLIA, which is our accreditation and what certifies and validates us to do what we do. So just obviously we can dive into that at whatever level you feel comfortable, but know that what we're doing, none of this is experimental. None of this is off label. We are doing things, whether it's our own laboratory developed test or it's something that is approved already by the FDA. And as far as on-site testing, there's lots of different ways this can work. We can do it to where we have employees and staff there that are handling it from start to finish. We can do it to where we give you the supplies and it's done and shipped off to the lab. There's a lot of different ways, like we talked about, just being customizable in that. And a big part of what we do and what you'll see from a lot of other labs is a 24-hour turnaround time. So we talk about testing in that sensitive time frame and that time frame of that window. It's important to get those results back fast, because how do you make decisions when you test somebody on Monday and you don't get results till Thursday? You're operating in the dark at that point. So we have, and it's something that this is not new for us. 24-hour turnaround time is actually just our foundation of what we do in all day in our clinical lab. So for instance, drug screens or clinical toxicology, blood work, when things come in, they're out as quick as possible. And the 24-hour turnaround is just what Radeas kind of stands on. And then the customizable side is once again, we talked about. We would love to get on a phone call with you, a Zoom call, or in person to really dive into, and we would love to see how does your business operate. And from a scientific and a medical side, we can really implement some protocols and procedures on how to perform what you're trying to achieve. And then we can bring Ann in on the HR side to make sure none of us go to jail. Totally kidding. And all the pressure's on you. We're in the clear on that. But at the end of the day, the one thing I want to end with on this slide is things are changing daily. And I know that sounds crazy. We are getting information on a Monday, and by Tuesday close of business, it's changed. So where the value in what we do, and yes, our value in testing is great for you, our understanding of how to give you that data and what to do with that data. But more importantly than that, you're in a time that you need a, lack of a better term, consultant. You need somebody who can manage this from start to finish. And people like Ann and people like ourselves can come alongside you and really run this side of it so you can go back to work. Because at the end of the day, if we stay like we are for too long, these businesses are going away. Not everybody's business, everybody's affected differently, but we have the ability to come alongside you and provide you with the information, both on the medical side and then also on the HR side, to figure out how do we get you back to work safely. And at the end of the day, I know that's what you guys want to do, not just from a profit standpoint, but I know you care about your employees, and I know there's a bigger picture of what you're doing and why your business is operating. And we would love to be a part of opening those doors again. So, Mike, anything additional?
Yeah, just as far as the next slide, if you want to jump on that, I believe, basically we'd love to follow up with you to talk through what your business looks like, what it would look like to set up a customized program. At the very basic, we can come in and do a screening for as low as $30 per employee. We've got our email address and phone numbers here if you do want to follow up via phone call or email, and then Ann's is provided. With that, do you want to shift over to Q&A unless there's anything else you'd want to add, Ann?
No, I just, again, we reiterate what you just said. We want to take care of our employees and we want to take care of our customers. And at the end of the day, as a business owner, you want to take care of your business as well. And whatever steps that you can take to minimize your risk, I would encourage you to do so. And again, I would reiterate to reach out and get the knowledge that you need, tap into the resources, whether that's going out to the CDC or contacting a consultant. but gather as much information as you can so that you're making a very informed business decision and you're confident in moving forward, and don't move forward and try to make decisions out of fear or the unknown. Again, you can't know everything, and you can't get rid of all your risk, but you can take great strides into minimizing that and be able to get your business back up and going and take care of people as we want to take care of them, like family.
Absolutely. So I saw a question pop up here from Melissa, and that's a good one. And I'll jump in really quick just so you understand. We have a lot of different options of how many times we will test employees or should test employees. From a standpoint of why we didn't dive into all the logistics is, once again, we talk about the different environments that we'll be testing into these different companies. But Melissa, if you have a staff that is larger and there's a closer work setting, right, and you can't really, not that you can't accommodate, but social distancing is tougher and you have a lot of interaction. We've seen people going once a week just to make sure we're capturing those asymptomatic patients as the world's opening back up, as people are going back to restaurants and the grocery stores are busier. And, we've seen as literally as much as once a week. You have people like the Clemson football team is talking about testing their players every single day. They go up, they come to the site, they get tested every day. So, I mean, you can be as dramatic as that, right? And some people need to be. You think of football. Well, they're not socially distancing. They're actually the exact opposite of that. So they need to be very cognizant of what information they have. So, and then we said we have other companies that are maybe smaller, that do have some more distance between employees that they're doing once a month, where we're going to do both an antibody test and a PCR test once a month, just to make sure, hey, have we been exposed and is it in there?
As far as the other question about testing in different parts of the country, so the question was located in Las Vegas, not able to find testing. Can we handle that remotely? So currently we operate in 38 states. We have accounts in Alaska that we still have a 24-hour turnaround time on. So as far as anywhere in the country, we absolutely can service that. We have employees located in different areas, and then we'd work to figure out what type of collection device we'd be using to determine what services would be provided. But as far as being able to support a business in North Carolina versus Alaska versus in Las Vegas, all those would kind of be the same style solution for us, and definitely be able to take care of that.
And I'll personally volunteer to come to Vegas to operate. Melissa will come with me. I know she will.
Those blackjack tables are calling.
That's right. Could have thought of some worse places for the question to ask. So absolutely. All right.
Melissa, I saw a question that came up about insurance. Is that something that you want to try to have answered, or do you have questions that you want to throw out to us?
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty common question, is how is this paid for? In-house insurance, a mix of both. What does that look like? And I know every it's not a one size fits all, but anything you can provide would be helpful.
It's not.
Yeah. So as far as insurance, absolutely, insurance does cover it. The president and the government actually came out and said we're not allowed as a lab to come after any copays or deductibles or anything to patients at all. So we will run the test, and the insurance will pick it up or not, and we have to figure that side of it out. When we talk about a workplace test, it does get a little bit different, right? Because you talk about, if I'm testing an employee 4 times a month, insurance doesn't cover 4 times a month typically. We don't really have a lot of data that's on COVID-19. It's just too soon to know that. So we have a couple different programs. We have programs to where it's employer sponsored completely, and there's no insurance side of it. We have hybrid programs where we're billing the patient's insurance and the employer's covering the service fees of getting people there to do the testing and supplies and things like that. And that's really going to change and depending upon each company. I know some people may be self-insured, and the last thing they want to do is file a bunch of insurance claims, right? And next year see their policy go through the roof. So there's kind of a natural ROI of what should we do here from a financial standpoint. And even people who are not self-insured that just offer healthcare to their employees, you know, healthcare providers and insurance providers run a report every year to see how many claims came out of your plan. So everybody's sensitivity to that is a little different, but yes, insurance can be billed. And there are platforms to bill the patient's insurance, and there is comfort in knowing that we're not going after any copays or deductibles. They actually won't even get a bill at all.
I would encourage employers to check with their carriers and find out, and then look at, you know, what is the best option for the company. It might be that you pick it up or take advantage of one of their plans, but definitely find out from your carriers. And then again, with that information, sit down and make the best decision and move forward with, you know, what works best for you.
I wonder if this could be a part of what's forgiven with PPP.
Not yet, but you never know. It could change tomorrow.
Yeah, good.
What's fascinating about the COVID testing is it's typically lab tests have to be driven by a physician order in order to be billed to insurance. And some of the deregulation that's occurred around COVID actually change that COVID testing does not need to be ordered by a physician in order to be billed for insurance.
Oh, wow. That's really helpful. All right. So thank you guys so much. Anne, Mike, Brian, this has been really, really helpful. I know
Absolutely.
We're recording this, so hopefully some people will be able to watch it afterwards as well. But if any of you would like more feedback, answers to some of the questions we didn't cover today, then feel free to reach out to Anne, to Mike, to Brian. And yeah, that's it. Amy, do you have anything to add?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for presenting. Anne, Brian, Mike, Melissa, thanks for helping put this together. Everything, the replay and the slide deck will be on eorally.com/coronavirus, and I will send out the replay this afternoon as well. So thank you all for coming, and y'all have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great day.
Bye.
Cool. No one,